Welcome to the Leadership School podcast. I'm your host, leadership and self-care coach, Kyla Kofer. Here at the Leadership School, you'll hear leaders from around the world sharing their stories and expertise on how to lead with balance and integrity. Our goal? Teach you how to be an extraordinary leader. Welcome back to the Leadership School podcast. I am Kyla Kofer, and I'm here today with my friend, Dr. Dan Franz, and we're going to be diving deep into the psychology of meaning, otherwise known as logotherapy. So what is this? Why is it important to leadership? How do we create meaning in our lives and in our leadership? Why does that matter? So please join me to welcome Dr. Dan Franz. Thanks for being here with me, Dan. I'm really grateful for you joining me on Leadership School. This is really fun. And we've talked for a long time, so it's nice to actually have a more purposeful, in-depth conversation. But why don't you just go ahead and tell me and tell our listeners all about yourself and what brings you to Leadership School today?
Sure. Well, yeah. Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Franz. A little bit about me. So I am a psychologist that specializes in the psychology of meaning. And because of that, I've branched out. One of my goals has always been through my studies, as I was studying the psychology of meaning, logotherapy, as we were saying, I kept saying more people need to know about this. This is such amazing stuff. And for me, it started with a very small, brief, simple book, Dr. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And many of us have either heard of it or read it. And it was probably about a decade ago. I was rereading it and it just struck me my goodness, I want to study more of this. I want to get deeper into this. And I found a school that offered an intense course of study, and I got a doctorate in it. And throughout all of those studies, I said, wow, more people need to know about this. And so because of that, I had to stop saying it and actually do it. And so I love taking that message to the speaking stage, to corporate coaching and consultation, and to podcasts like yours.
Okay, so you've said a lot of things. So you have a doctorate in psychology and specifically in logotherapy.
Correct.
Which is the psychology of meaning?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Well, I think I listened to it, to be honest. I think I listened to the audio version. So I need to do a reread of it. But I had never heard of Viktor Frankl until this year, even though I have a degree in psychology. But we just hadn't heard of him. And, to be fair, maybe I just didn't. It was just a bachelor's degree. So maybe we didn't get that far into it. And it was a minor in my degree. So I probably didn't get too far into it. But I did not know about Frankl. So can you explain who Viktor Frankl is and what this book is and why it's so important? And I think as we talk about that, it'll be really clear on why this is important to leaders.
Sure, absolutely. So, my goodness, you're so right. I think in our bachelor's in psychology, even in my master's in psychology, he was a footnote to a lot of theory. And so for me, grabbing Man's Search for Meaning, I read it a couple times, and for some reason, a decade ago, it just stuck and it really connected with me.
It kind of boggles my mind that it's a footnote. I know. I even heard somebody tell me when I first heard about him earlier this year, I heard because this person said Viktor Frankl saved society. He just saved us and changed the way that we view everything. And so it doesn't make sense to me that he's a footnote. But anyways, go ahead.
I think my experience has been he's much more commonly known in European culture because he's originally from Vienna, and a little bit in California because he did some time lecturing out there. That's why I made it my mission to bring this more. And actually I work with some people in the Logotherapy Institute of America to continue to do that.
Where's that?
It's in California. Okay. It is actually ran by a wonderful woman by the name of Pam Roy, who is a advocate for improving education. And she is partnered with Alex Vesely, who is actually Viktor Frankl's grandson, who I've had the pleasure of spending some time with and has been on my podcast a few times. So there's a lot of groups trying to get that information out more, but you're right. These are simple yet groundbreaking ideas. Now, I will say Man's Search for Meaning Last statistic I saw is one of the top 10 gifted books of the past century. So the book's out there and around, but maybe we're just not diving deep enough into it. So,
or we read it and think, oh, that's an interesting story. But if you're not someone who like psychology is super interesting to you, it's probably just going to be a good story. And, but for those of us who are like, talking about mental health, well-being, all mental health professionals, we're like, oh, this is awesome. And we get so excited about it. But if that's not your field of interest, you're like, put the gifted book on the shelf and be like, thanks, grandma,
Right. Well, and the idea is, that book, so you asked that question about the book. It was his, after he, there's a long way to go about this story, but the book itself, the first 2/3 are all about his experience in the Nazi concentration camps. So it's a really heartbreaking and heartwarming story. It's beautifully written. And then the last third is maybe a little bit of psychological theory. And by the time people get done with that, the average reader is like, okay, that was kind of nice. I'll put it down. But I agree with you for the psychology student or the person interested in mental health. For me, my thought was, okay, I have to every year get continuing education units. How can I get them focused on this and where do I need to go? And that's how I found the doctorate program. I'm like, well, that's going to cover some continuing education for quite a while.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go back to your question. Who is Dr. Viktor Frankl? He was a neurologist. He had multiple degrees, right? So he was kind of a child prodigy. So much so that when he was maybe 15 or 16, he was writing this really famous guy you might have heard of, a gentleman by the name of Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
So back in the early days of psychology, Frankl finds Freud and he starts emailing him. That's my joke. He starts to correspond with him, writing him letters back and forth. And Freud says, young man, these are some really good ideas. I want you to study with my student, Dr. Alfred Adler. And so they're studying together. Frankl continues to grow in this idea. Freud told us that man is a being in search of pleasure, right? And many of us know where that goes in Freud's theories. His student Adler says, no, man is a being in search of power. And Frankl comes about a few years later and says, I think you're both wrong. Man is a being in search of meaning. And he begins to form these opinions in the early 1900s, building his theory. He's lecturing. He ran one of the most successful clinics in his hometown of Vienna after World War I. If you remember your history, your European history, Vienna after World War I, they didn't win. They were not on the winning side. So life in Vienna was pretty difficult back then. A lot of suicide, a lot of sadness, depression. And he came into one of the poly clinics and eventually with his theories was able to take the suicide rate down to 0. So some groundbreaking work using his theories. And then of course a few years later, that terrible man, Adolf Hitler, decides he's going to invade Austria, and Frankl was a Jew practicing in Vienna. He was able to avoid the concentration camps for a while. Man's Search for Meaning has a beautiful story about that, about how he chose whether or not to, he had a visa to come to the United States, and he was debating within himself, do I take advantage of this visa and go to the U.S., or do I stay with my family and try to see them through this? And it was a very meaningful decision to him to stay with his family. And eventually he was taken to the concentration camps. And one of the stories is he had the notes for his ideas, pinned to the inside of his jacket. And of course, when he arrived at the gate, they took that from him.
He had spent a lot of time and energy and effort writing a book, I think, from what I remember, and lost all of that thought. And oh man, just losing a to-do list is rough. Like losing that much work product would just be devastating. And yet he survived the camps. And he was there for a long time. Right.
That is one of the reasons he credits with his survival, is he had this meaning out there that I have to get out and write this book. I have to share this. And he would find nubs of pencils and write notes, or whatever he could do to write notes for the 3 years he was in the concentration camps. And that is Man's Search for Meaning, is almost a fever rush after just a few weeks after liberation. I believe I believe it says like it was written in maybe 9 or 10 days. He just had to get those ideas down on paper. And that's why the beginning, the first 2/3 are all about his experiences in the concentration camps. And the last third is probably the theory, as he calls it. It's logotherapy in a nutshell. That's the name of the chapter, is just, what he could get down in that rush to get it out of his head and document.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is in his method of survival, and he talks about this through the books and his subsequent books, that one of the reasons he was able to survive, like you said, is because of this drive, this purpose that he had. And he noticed that people who struggled more versus the people who were able to thrive more in such horrible conditions was the meaning and the purpose that you had within you. And we've seen that, like, how many stories have we seen that? What was the one where the people were prisoners? The guy was a prisoner of war. He was an athlete, prisoner of war. I'm trying to remember the Unbroken. Is that it? And he was lost at sea, plane crashed, lost at sea with a couple of his buddies. And the ones that survived were the ones that had that mentality of like, I have to be somewhere. I have purpose. We can do this. And this attitude. And how many times just in medical field have you seen people who have, against all odds, thrived because of their mentality? And nowadays we can't use the word mindset, but it's the way that our mind actually has the ability to heal us. And of course, that's not always the case, but it is extremely powerful. So we know who Frankl is. He's got this book, Man's Search for Meaning. We talk about meaning. But how does that apply then as in a psychology practice and your training? You're a speaker. We met through our speaking program. And so tell me more about, what excites you about all of that? What makes you like this internally, that this has to get to more people, but what about it is so like, this has to be out there? I
think just the idea, if Dr. Frankl can survive 3 years in the Nazi concentration camps with these using, like literally, he had been forming them for years, but he had to truly test these theories and put them to work. And he got through that. These ideas can help us get through anything. A difficult work environment, COVID, difficult situations at home. One of the things I remember reading, throughout my studies, one of the things we talked about was logotherapy is the perfect adjunct to any kind of therapy, right? It may not cure depression or anxiety, but it can certainly be an important and powerful part of it. And I believe, a lot of the theories from logotherapy can help our current struggling, I guess maybe we can call it, work environment, work situation. Whether it's those people that are out of work or don't want to work, or those people in the workforce struggling with supply chain shortages and all the other issues we're encountering.
Yeah. So one thing that I try and do with my kids, and it's been more effective with my daughter because she's youngest, and I started with her a little bit earlier than I did with my older, is affirmations. And I've heard about this a lot in the last 10 years, 5-10 years. We've seen the viral YouTube videos of the children who are like, I've got this and I can do this, and I did this with my daughter. It was, she at our zoo, we have like this epic playground, and they have this rope ladder that it's kind of like a 3-story rope ladder, and it's really challenging for small feet. And she gets on it and she gets stuck. So I'll get up there and hold her hand, or I'll stand next to her and we'll just over and over, I'll make her say, I've got this. I can do this. I'm awesome. I can do hard things. Glennon Doyle's phrase. So we work on that. So is that the same thing as what you're talking about? Like this mindset of I can do this? Or is that just a way of like reminding ourselves of our purpose? Like is meaning more forward focused? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking towards something, and I'm trying like goals. I've got this goal, so I got to keep going until I meet this goal. I'm running a race, and I got to get to the finish line. Or is the affirmations is more like the pep talk you get to get there?
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Affirmations are certainly a pep talk. Logotherapy and the ideas that come along with it are certainly more future focused and goal oriented. One of the concepts is that, life, we each have this task to complete in life. Life is asking something of us. And part of our goal in life, part of what gives us meaning is to find out what that is. And we can only do that by taking action, by working, by creating art and podcasts and things like that, by trying to discover what that meaning of our lives is. And part of the way to get there is to know you can do it. And even more so that you can do it, that you have to do it through difficult situations. Climbing that rope ladder is scary. It's physically demanding. She might fall off and hurt herself, but life is saying you can do this and you've got to do it and you can get through these hard times. And when you get to the other side of that hard time, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to feel happier, healthier, accomplished. And that's just a microcosm. That's a great young person example of what we deal with as adults, that, life is out there. When we aren't striving to discover meaning, to accomplish something in life, we feel depressed and anxious. Remember all the people that were stuck at home and didn't have anything to do through COVID, and just how it became a national joke about alcohol sales continuing to climb. And that's because we couldn't strive. We couldn't struggle to become better, to do things. And now that we're out there, I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in some ways.
So how is this related to like connection? So I feel like connection is, when you're talking about during COVID and we were all struggling, I think one of those reasons is because we weren't connected to ourselves and then to the world around us. And so I'm trying to think as you're talking, like, what would you say is kind of the differences there? How would you distinguish that? And is that important? I don't know if that's even important to distinguish, but, I think that we can't thrive without connection, but I'm hearing you say that we can't thrive without meaning. So I'm wondering, which is it, or is it both?
It's certainly both. So in the pursuit of meaning, one of the most meaningful things we can do in life is to transcend ourselves, to step outside ourselves in service of others, to build connection, to build true connection. And when we do that, one of my favorite quotes from the great poet and prophet Joe Rogan, he says, when you do things for others, you're being selfish because it feels good, right? And so the field of logotherapy says that is one of the most meaningful things we can do. The act of self-transcendence, stepping outside of ourselves in true service of others is connecting, but it also allows us to discover meaning. And so, yes, they certainly go hand in hand. True connection with another human being is a very meaningful experience.
Here at Leadership School, we talk a lot about doing your own personal development work. And I will say this in every single episode that I really don't think that you can be a positive, successful leader. And when I say positive, successful leader, because I think there are a lot of successful leaders who aren't like morally upstanding or who are negative or who are not like people I want to look up to, and they're successful and they're leaders, but they're not great. So, I say positive. So if you want to be a positive, successful leader, you have to do your own personal development work. So I think that's why this conversation is really important to talk about, like, okay, if we're all in this search for meaning, we have to do that for ourselves, but then also as leaders, being aware that the people we're leading are doing that work. So how can we come alongside and support them in doing that work? So if we're struggling in our own space of looking for meaning, one thing that we do a lot in coaching is just really talking about like what areas of your life are you satisfied in and what areas are you not satisfied in, and like it kind of gives you this picture of where you are and where you're wanting to go. But I see a lot of people, myself included in the past, of I don't know who I am, where I want to go. I don't know what I'm here for and what's my purpose, what's my calling, what's my mission, what's my vision, all of these things. What am I supposed to do for my career? And then in this struggle for figuring that out, we tend to feel worthless or not good enough, or like we haven't met something. And we hear a lot of those negative voices. So what have you seen in your practice of people who've been able to make that shift into this floundering, I don't know who I am and what I'm going to do, to, and I'm not good enough, to being able to do that shift of, I am good enough, I do know, and I am going forward? What are the skills and tools that you use to help people make that transition and process for themselves?
So this is going to be deeply psychological here.
Good.
What I'm about to tell you is very expensive therapy. So people can, I hope people take this away. And this is years, months, weeks of therapy, right? Very, very hard stuff. Go do it. Go do it. Everything I heard you, right? The floundering and the stalling. Where do I need to go? What do I need to do? Oh my goodness. What am I supposed to be? You'll never know sitting there thinking about it. You got to go do it. Run the experiment. Try something. Check this out. Try something and fail. Please go out there and fail. Fail early, fail often, as the great Seth Godin says, right? Like you won't know until you try, and you won't discover yourself until you try and maybe fail and go a different direction. But the bottom line, go take responsible action. Go do something.
It's really amazing how much meaning we find in just doing something. I mean, anything. And that sense of being. I remember somebody saying that work gives you dignity, like just doing work gives you dignity. So whatever that work is, if it's delivering pizzas or working at I don't know, being a janitor or school bus driver or the CEO, to any type of movement into work, like putting that effort into something and doing your best at it, regardless of the position, gives you dignity. And so it's learning a lot. What we talk here is just kind of learning the balance and the boundaries in between all of that, and then learning to finesse it and learning to really like push ourselves further. So I love this of, yes, okay, well, just go try the next thing. You're not sure what to do, just try it. And it's really cool how I literally told this to somebody yesterday. The less we worry about whatever anybody's thinking about us, and we just step into what we like, what we enjoy, what we want, who we are, and just doing those things, really the more powerful we come. So, I mean, maybe people are in search of power and we use meaning to find that power, but the powerful we come like within ourselves. I think we accomplish so much more in our lives, in our roles, and we put ourselves into those leadership positions because we're like showing up for ourselves and doing the things that give us life. And when we're giving ourselves that life, that's that finding that meaning. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Since you've listened this far, it tells me you're really enjoying the content. And I'm so, so grateful. I work really hard to bring you some awesome resources to help really enhance your leadership game. If you're liking this, can you pause really quickly? Make sure you're subscribed, but then also share with one person or more people who you think could really benefit from the content. My goal is to really bring this into some of the top podcasts on leadership in the world, and you can help get there and help us grow by sharing this with everyone you know. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying the episode.
Absolutely. So I'll share with you one of the tools I use is called the meaning triangle, right? There are 3 ways that we discover meaning in life. One is through our creativity, what we create, and one of those things we create is work, right? How we approach work, what we create, is it meaningful? Do we find meaning in it? But also our attitude towards it too. Like, not everybody's job is the most creative, meaningful job out there. Sometimes, we need people, you got to go dig ditches. But if you're going to dig ditches, be the best damn ditch digger out there and the one that's helping everybody else and having a good time and really taking pride in it. And there's meaning there. So our creativity, what we give to life through our work, through our attitudes, especially our attitudes in the face of suffering and difficult times. And then what we experience, right? Going out and seeing, I don't know about, I walked out this morning to go walk the dogs and it had just rained and the sun was rising and this beautiful cloud formation. My goodness, I'm in Farmville, Indiana here, but I felt like I was on top of a mountain in Colorado, and just allowing that, just drinking that in was so meaningful.
So I'm hearing like a sense of gratitude, having gratitude for the things that are around you.
Absolutely.
I'm really curious. You said something about suffering.
So our attitudes towards uncontrollable suffering can either provide meaning or it can cause us to crumble. Part of the human condition is pain, guilt, and death. We call that the tragic triad, right? These are 3 things we cannot escape in life. We're going to experience pain, we're going to deal with guilt, and all of us are going to die, right? But of those things, if we can look at those and challenge them and turn that suffering into achievement, into accomplishment, I mean, those are some of the most heroic stories we hear, we see, and we read. And we each have that opportunity to live that heroic story.
I mean, isn't that the truth? We thrive off of, I've been doing some research on keynote speeches, and it's so interesting that every great keynote speech comes from a story of some distress in some form or fashion, whether that's a physical disability or limitation or a tragedy or something bad happening in your life, just something bad, or every great keynote is inspired from all of those things because we love story and we love bringing that story into our lives. So I think that that's really cool if we can make that effort to find ways to turn those stories into triumphs and to think of ourselves as our life is a story. So where are our triumphs? And how do we generate that mindset of I don't want to think this positive attitude because that can turn really toxic really fast.
Right. We talk about toxic positivity a lot.
Right. That can turn so toxic if you're like, I'm just going to be positive about everything. My dog died, but it's going to be okay because
it's going to be great. Everything is awesome.
Yeah, like I don't think that's okay. And that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is finding positivity and taking control over your attitude and your experiences. So,
and I would say that's our attitude, right? That's our attitude in all of life. And there's an opportunity for meaning in that attitude in how we show up.
Okay. So the struggle with this is going to come from me, who is a pessimist, a natural pessimist. And so I really have to work at this. I don't know how to say this, but I just really have to put a lot of effort into not first seeing the worst thing that can happen. I also call myself a doomsdayer. So I'm always like, what's the worst thing that could happen in this situation? And let's be prepared for that.
But it's interesting.
So
I just talked to somebody about that this morning, right? Really? And we framed that differently. That we said, he was telling me, I just always think about the worst case scenario and to be prepared for it. I said, that's amazing, because then you're prepared for whatever might come up. And when it isn't the worst case scenario, you feel elated, right? So preparing for difficult things isn't that bad. Now, when it's your primary mode of operation and everything, you walk around like Eeyore the donkey, everything's terrible. Okay, that's going to be a bit of a problem. But being prepared for difficult situations, we call that resiliency.
Yeah, I'm resilient. I like
There you go. Right?
Tell us a little bit, some of the tricks that you have for changing some of that thought process, because my negativity comes from a long line of negative people, of pessimism. I remember going to my great uncle's house and his wife, my great aunt, saying, well, he's a natural pessimist. And that's the whole entire Kofer family. Like, we just have this natural ability to be pessimistic. But those of us who have been really successful have found ways to kind of turn that around. And I wouldn't say that it's like a genetic trait or something, but I do notice in my life that I tend to fall towards that, and it takes me effort to look the other way, because part of that is my choice of, I don't want to have a negative life. Like, I want to have a life that is full, that is joyful, positive, full of meaning, and that I know where I'm going and I'm working towards that. And I might not be there today, but I'm always working in a direction and trying new things and failing and all that stuff. So how do you advise people on ways to kind of change that? Because it's not something that we can just like open the door and our lives are different. I mean, how many times have we thought, okay, I'm going to make this decision and then everything's going away, or I'm going to therapy one time and like all those problems are going away. And I don't know, I just feel like we have that light bulb moment and then everything's different in our lives, but it never ever works like that. I mean, maybe rarely, every once in a while, it's like a light bulb moment and then all of a sudden everything's different, but it takes work.
And there we go, Kylie. You're exactly right. It takes work. The light bulb only prepares us for the difficult work of living, right? So we have that light bulb. That's the idea, right? That's the goal. That's the accomplishment we want to get to. But it takes work to get there, right? This amazing podcast you have was a light bulb however long ago. And this episode, I think you said nearly 50 episodes, didn't just happen. It's a grind, but it's a meaningful grind. You're sharing with people that need this information. But that's life. We have some big, great goal we want to get to, and it's a daily chore. It's a task, but hopefully it's a meaningful one, because it's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be positive. There are going to be obstacles. There might even be failure at some point. But when we choose to have a healthy attitude of, yep, made a mistake there, failed, I'm going to pick myself up and do it again, right? I'm going to try to figure it out. Failure is simply the universe's way of saying, you might want to rethink that plan. And I think our world fears failure so much. That's what keeps people stuck. If there's one message leaders, anybody takes from this today, it's don't fear failure. Failure is a beautiful gift. When you do it once, when you fail the same way once, learn and grow from it. If you're failing the same way for the 10th time, you got a problem that you need to figure out.
Right. Failure just tells us what needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that destroys our life, typically.
Only if we let it.
Again, we 100% of the time have control over how we show up and how we respond to things. So if we have a major failure in our life, we can wallow in it for a minute because that's appropriate to grieve like the failure. But then we say, okay, like what is this going to teach me and how can I go forward and how can I create meaning out of this failure? How's it going to change me and how's it going to change the situation? I think this is really helpful for leaders because...
Well, let me jump in there. That's the healthy thing to do, is to grieve it, to feel the emotions, to experience it, to reflect upon it. It's that toxic positivity of, well, I failed and now everything's great. No, it's not. It's not. And it can't be. But when we take the moment to embrace the world and reality, whatever our attitude is, and grow from it, well, we become healthier. We discover meaning. But that idea of, well, everything is awesome. You know, I just lost $1 million. Everything's great. Made a bad. No, you grow from it and you learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. But well, and then leaders, we have the gift of giving other people that space too. Like, you totally failed. I'm not going to fire you because I just invested in you and learning this lesson. So, but you failed. Let's own that. Let's all be disappointed, upset, and angry about that. But then let's figure out how we're going to go from here. And I think that when we have that meaning attached to the work that we're doing and to us as humans, we don't need failures to be so devastating because we can see this bigger picture of who we are and where other people are too and where we're going.
Agreed. You know, failure does not have to be devastating. It should be a learning experience. Like I said, we should all be failing a lot more because that means we're trying a lot more.
Absolutely. So tell me, we've kind of talked about all these little things and you've kind of gave us a really good perspective of logotherapy and theology. I want to say theology. I keep wanting to say theology because logo makes me like go to Theo for some reason. But
right. So I think it's in the first few pages of the Bible, like, you know, the word was logos or something like that. So Frankl takes it from the Greek where logos is, you know, means meaning, but meaning is, I did a podcast a while back where another logotherapist and I went around for an hour like, okay, what is meaning? It's not one of those easy things to define. So there is some spiritual theological component to it as well.
Okay, well then I'll just keep calling it theology, logo theology.
Let's call it logo philosophy because more than just a form of therapy, it really is a way of living.
Yeah, a way of living. So you're using it in therapy because you're a therapist. And so that's one thing that you do. And you also speak about it. Mm-hmm. And when you're speaking, tell me a little bit about what that talk is. Like, what are you trying to bring to the audience as you're sharing meaning? Or what are you hoping people will do after you present about, let me tell you what logotherapy is, and let me tell you who Viktor Frankl was, and let me tell you how it can change your life to incorporate meaning?
Well, I think it's a lot of the little theories that come out in my different speeches that as leader, you know, when speaking to leaders and especially corporate leaders, I'm going to go back to what you said. To be a successful and positive leader, what does success truly mean? It's not about the dollar signs all the time, but sometimes success as a leader is improving the lives of the people you're responsible for. And how do you do that? You give them opportunities to discover meaning. You allow them to be creative in their work. You encourage them to step outside themselves, to transcend the self, to help others. Some of the most successful leaders I know are ones that organize on company time opportunities for their workforce to go out and improve their communities. It's an amazing experience. So a lot of the speech is incorporating the little pieces of logotherapy in what it means to be a leader and to take that to your workforce and to lead with meaning.
I'm just soaking it all in. It's just a great way to approach life overall and just approach the work that we do. And we've talked a lot about, and I'm seeing this conversation happening a lot about the topic of psychological safety at work. Mm-hmm. And not just safety at work, physical safety at work. You know, my husband just had an OSHA inspection at his job, and you never want OSHA to show up because they're going to tell you to fix something. But the goal is to always be keeping people physically safe at work. But when people are also psychologically safe at work, they are able to actually accomplish more. And because they have this meaning attached to the work that they do. Think about how many times we have stayed in a job because we liked it, even though it wasn't paying us well, and it was probably harming us in some way, but we liked the work that we did. We found we liked the end result. We liked the service that we were doing. We liked how we were changing people's lives, or we liked the project itself. We liked being involved somehow. And then when that changes, it's because that meaning gets taken away. When we're thinking, I no longer feel like I belong. I no longer feel like I'm called to do this. I no longer feel like I'm being helpful. I'm being wanted or needed or respected. And all of those things circle back into meaning. And so if we are leading teams, leading each other and ourselves, then we've got to start here, because that's what keeps you going each day, keeps you motivated and keeps you alive, is this idea that I'm part of something that's greater than just the way that I'm here.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important part. I am part of something greater. And I'm going to use the word you threw out earlier. When people feel connected and a sense of purpose and meaning in their work, they'll endure some really difficult situations, whether that's a difficult supervisor or hard tasks. When they're connected and they see a higher meaning to what they're doing, they certainly stick around. And I think sometimes that might be what we are struggling with in our workforce right now. Too many corporations, manufacturers miss that, just treated people as another piece of the machine, and they don't want that anymore. They're learning. We're seeing this great shift in the economy and in how we do work, and people are realizing I can find meaning somewhere in a task, in work, but maybe it's not this company. And that's the challenge for many leaders. I attended this amazing conference earlier this year called the Purpose Summit, where corporate leaders came in to understand these ideas of meaning and purpose in the workforce. The sad part was there was only about 250 people there. The good thing is there were 250 people there that were taking out this idea. And one of the most powerful things I heard was, right now we are just beginning to understand how to do this in the workforce. And many people are doing it wrong. Some people are doing it right. But in a time like this, there's such great opportunity for innovation. And so that would be the challenge to any leader out there listening. What are you doing to innovate, to bring meaning, culture, successful leadership to your organization? Because you have an amazing opportunity. I would say you have a responsibility to do that.
That's awesome. Hey, Dan, I have a couple of extra questions for you, but is there anything else that you think would be really helpful for our listeners to know as we're talking about?
I tell you what, I've dedicated the past decade plus of my life to this kind of idea. So there's a lot of places I can go. I'm not sure your podcast wants a 16-week graduate study course right now. So you fire off some questions and we'll see where it goes.
No, we are focused here on really helping and supporting leaders in their journeys and giving just little pieces that might help you. And so if this is a practice that you want to get more into, then Dan is the person to reach out to. And all of your information, Dan, will be in our show notes with a link to your website, I believe, awesome. And everything else. So make sure to check out Dan there. And I'll have you promote that in a second too, Dan. But I would love to hear from you the answers to my two famous questions that I've been asking every guest this season. And that is, what does integrity mean to you?
Integrity. Oh, integrity means doing what you say you're going to do, even when nobody's watching.
That's actually the most common response. It's really interesting because this is great. There's nothing wrong with that. What's interesting is I have noticed that people tend to have a different definition of integrity, that even though I've asked, 30 people this question, usually the answers are different. And that, which is fascinating, because you feel like if I want to define something, a mug, like I know what a mug is. I can describe what a mug is and what that looks like. I'm holding a mug in my hand. But when you have more like ideas like integrity, the answers tend to differ, but that is actually the most common response. And so I feel like there's something really to that. And it's interesting because it's not the one that I would have ever given, because I usually think of integrity as more like a moral thing. But I love this of, yes, doing what you say you're going to do. It's committed. It's a commitment. It's a commitment to a process, to a promise, to not backing down and doing things.
Well, and it's even a commitment to yourself, right? I think the game of golf is a great example. You can go out and play a round of golf by yourself and say you had the best round ever. I shot a 50. But if you actually shot 100, you're only lying to yourself. So in the end, yeah, you can lie to a lot of people, but if you don't have integrity, you're only hurting yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all these things that you do, your practice and you're speaking and you're doing podcasts, and I know you've got a family. How do you find balance, and what does balance look like to you personally?
That's I actually have it written over there on a first word on a piece of paper I wrote back in December of 2021. That I was, those were my words for the year: balance, discipline, obviously speak, and write. I try to integrate balance into everything. I love being out there helping people and finding different ways to do that. And so any opportunity I have to either speak, to be on a podcast, to do my own podcast, to coach individuals, to counsel individuals, I will find a way to do that as long as it also serves my family, right? So to be able to be out there and helping people, it gives me meaning and it helps people, but it also has to help my family achieve their goals, whether that's my daughter going off to college or playing tennis, the other one playing tennis, or, spending time with my wife. That balance is important.
So boundaries incorporated into the things that you say yes to.
I think absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, Dan, how can we all find you if we want to learn more?
Absolutely. You can check me out at The Meaning Project Podcast. And you can find out everything else about me at danielafranz.com. That's DANIELAFRANZ.com.
Awesome. So be sure to follow up with Dan and learn more and investigate more into this, because it really has the potential of completely changing the way that we show up as leaders. When we're finding more meaning in our own lives, then we're more passionate about the things that we do. We show up in extraordinary ways, and then we share that with other people, and we allow people to come into their own story as well and find their own meanings into what they're doing. And then we bring in better people to work with, right? So we're bringing in people who find meaning in their work, and that's the best employee to have, is someone who really is going to find meaning in that position, in that role. And the same thing for you as a leader, that when you're excited about something, it's because you're finding the meaning and the purpose and behind that. So I'm using those terms interchangeably, meaning and purpose, but because in my mind, they mean the same thing. So I don't know.
They're similar.
What'd you say?
Yeah, a little nuance, but definitely similar.
So that's another episode to talk about the difference.
I was just going to say, how much time do you have? Because we can go do.
Or I'm sure we'll do that over on your podcast in The Meaning Project at some point soon. Dan, thanks so much for joining me. And this has been really a delightful conversation. Such a pleasure to have you in my group of colleagues and enjoy this leadership and mental health space with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kyla.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you've liked what you heard and you want some more tools and resources to help you on your journey, go check out kylakofer.com/free stuff.